like delayed. All right, so who is ready to go on an adventure today? Woo! All right, it's almost lunchtime. People are ready for an adventure. I have to say it's great to be able to meet in person finally after so long of everybody doing everything virtual. But we are actually going to have to take a virtual adventure today, all right? So you can join me by closing your eyes, taking a nap, whatever you want to do, but go ahead and join me on this, all right? So I'm going to use, unfortunately, it's a beach analogy a little bit today, so I'm not copying you. This was already in my talk before, so I was like, no, I did not create my talk on the fly after listening to him. But, so the adventure that we're going on, we actually have to start on land. So just imagine that your feet are planted in some warm sand. Cool breeze in the air. You're feeling grounded, you're feeling comfortable. And you just take a look out into the ocean. And right now it's so calm and so peaceful. The sun is just starting to rise. You just see these gorgeous colors, blues, turquoise, reds, yellows. It's just beautiful. And then your eyes just look up a bit and you just glance at the horizon. And you know, that horizon, it looks so expansive, limitless. And you know, for you, you go, this gets me a little excited. Some butterflies in my stomach. But for many other people, that expansiveness and that lack of limitations could really start to make them feel a little fearful. But because you got those butterflies in your stomach, you know you're probably ready for this adventure, the entrepreneurial adventure. So in that moment, you just look back one more time at that safe land behind you, and then you say, the most confident voice you can muster up, and you say, I got this. And then you set off into the unknown of the ocean. And now, at first, that journey is going really smooth. Seas are calm, everything's really perfect. It's like every type A personality's dream, things going as perfectly as planned. You're like, it's great. And then this thought flashes into your mind. And that thought is, this is a piece of cake I probably overplanned. And no sooner than you just said that, or thought that really, next thing you know, it's like the universe heard you. Because it realized you were being a little cocky. So all of a sudden everything shifts. Now the skies are turning a little darker, the wind is picking up, the waves are getting bigger, the boats are rocking, and out goes overboard some of your food, supplies, and really some of the courage that you had originally when you set out onto this adventure. Well, now you're starting to feel a little sense of panic because some of my supplies are overboard, it's really rocky, I feel that this is going to be a treacherous voyage, I'm really starting to panic. But you're keeping the panic under control. But it's still boiling up inside. And all of a sudden, way, way in the distance, just as your fear is about to take over, you see this glimpse of land. Oh, thank goodness. Now you're feeling like, okay, I got this again, I'm good. And I have to tell you, being an entrepreneur as many times as I've done it, this is exactly what entrepreneurship is like. You have moments of like, wow, sheer courage, I got this, I'm a woman, it's all that. And then next thing you know, you're like, oh, I don't know if I got this, I'm not really sure about myself. And then in a few minutes, you're like panicking, and then the panic escalates, and then all of a sudden, something happens and gives you just this little semblance of hope. Every entrepreneur, we just need that little thing of hope. Just grab onto it and keep going. So in that moment of like, you see land, you're like, oh, thank goodness, I'm almost there. I can actually do this. Well, entrepreneurship, I've done it enough times that, I've really learned to navigate this emotional roller coaster, which I fondly refer to as entrepreneurial mania. Sometimes it feels like you're a little manic. And how I've learned to navigate this is by using feminine entrepreneurship instead of traditional entrepreneurship. What's the difference, you might be wondering? Traditional entrepreneurship, and sticking with our allegory of the ocean, kind of looks like somebody who is going through waves with brute force. And as you can imagine, when you go through waves with brute force, you get knocked down by every single wave. And it gets harder and harder to get back up. That's traditional entrepreneurship, really. I've done it that way, so I know. Feminine entrepreneurship, on the other hand, is different. Feminine entrepreneurship requires you to navigate those waves, navigate the ebbs and flows, having moments of action followed by moments of rest or surrender, and actually knowing and having the wisdom to know the difference. When you use traditional entrepreneurship, you're going to feel beaten up. You're going to feel like you can't wait until your next vacation. You can't wait to do something else. That's how it feels, because you're looking for an escape. Now, using feminine entrepreneurship, you're just going to ride those waves effortlessly. You know, your makeup's still on, you're still looking good, and you just do it until you want to stop. Nothing forces you to stop. You make the decision. So I'm going to share those techniques that I have with you, but first, let's talk a little bit about the skills required in entrepreneurship. Of course, there are many, but for the sake of this discussion, I'm going to stick to the top 3 that I feel are the most important. So the first one is, I'm sorry, I forgot, I'm terrible about changing slides. The first one is courage. Fearlessness is not the absence of fear, it's the mastery of fear. Words from Arianna Huffington. Now, interestingly enough, you know, Arianna made this decision to start off on a journey, an adventure that she wanted to go to Cambridge. Doesn't sound like it's a big issue, but it was for her because she lived in Greece, she didn't speak any English, and her parents weren't wealthy enough to send her somewhere. Bottom line is she decided to make a courageous decision on that day. That courageous decision served her well. To date, she has authored 14 books. She is on Time Magazine's top 100 influential people's list. She's on Forbes Magazine's top most powerful women's list. I would say that courage served her well. And in that same way, if you're sitting here today, you probably feel like you're in the process or have mastered the fear. It's always a process, but that's okay. And the bottom line is it takes courage to start something according to your own vision. It takes courage to do it your way. It takes courage to navigate the financial ebbs and flows of starting a new business. That all takes courage. Because most people, they take the easy way out. What do most people do? They go work for somebody and complain about how it's done. I've never been a good complainer about how things are done, so when I start complaining about how things are done, I decide I can do it better myself. And that's been my motto. So in that way, I was starting to complain about medicine because things started to change over the years that were dissatisfying me because I loved getting to know my patients. I loved understanding where they were coming from and counseling them on wellness. But once medicine started to shift to the point where I couldn't spend the time with the patients, I had to hurry through the day, hurry through the patient visits, I found it unfulfilling. And in that moment, I knew I had to make a change because I've always enjoyed empowering people, especially women, and because of that, I was already not able to do it so much in my practice, and then I was only able to do it one-on-one. Well, I loved the idea of whenever I spoke in large audiences and on television that I was able to empower so many people at one time. So my next path became very, very obvious. So I made the courageous decision to leave a very successful career in medicine to do something that was more my soul's calling, and hence professional speaking, being an author, etc. Now, the next trait that all entrepreneurs must have is ambition. Now, I know none of us suffer from a lack of ambition here today, but there's no force more powerful than a woman determined to rise. And I would say I definitely agree with that. But with women, I would say that the one mistake that we make is that we tend to put all our ambition into the professional basket. We kind of have to overprove ourselves a lot, you know? So we're like all in the one basket. I don't know if you guys do this, but I did that because I felt like I really had to prove myself to not only other people, but to myself. But over the years, I've learned that that left me feeling very imbalanced and not leaving me feeling as whole as I wanted to. So what I've done differently over the past 5 or 7 years is I stopped using all of my ambition into my professional basket. Started to put it more into other things that I wanted to do. And that made my life feel more expansive, just like I like it to. And I started to race cars. I did that for a while, and it was really enjoyable. I'm a little bit of a daredevil, so that's probably going to explain the next things that I've done. I got my scuba diving certification, and now I'm working on a black belt in Krav Maga. And it has been such an adventure and such a journey because, and the interesting thing is that because of putting things in different baskets, I've actually feel that my professional life has not taken a turn for the worse. It's actually taken a turn for the better. And it's interesting how that happened because I didn't expect it. I just knew that I needed to feel more balanced in my life, so I started in that way. And next thing you know, my professional career actually was moving along a lot faster than it was originally when that's all I cared about. So I thought that was interesting to share. The next one is resilience. There is no such thing as failure. Failure is just life trying to push you into a different direction. Oprah Winfrey. Now, I love Oprah, big fan. How many of you know that Oprah got fired from her first job as a TV evening reporter? And do you know why? This was what I loved. Oprah got fired because her bosses said that she needed to tone herself down. She was too emotional to be reporting on the evening news. So they fired her. Well, you know what? Oprah could have let that stop her and she could have just crumbled and been upset. I mean, this was not an easy thing for a African-American woman in that time frame to even deal with. So, but what did she do? She got back up. She didn't let it knock her down, and guess what? I think Oprah did way better than reporting on the evening news at that station for sure.
Her own station.
Exactly. She's like, well, I don't need you. I have my own station and my own show. So, hello, I'm Oprah. So you gotta love that. I mean, when it comes to resilience, to me, Oprah came from such a difficult background. I love reading about her story. And when I read that and see Oprah from where she was to this powerful woman who's a billionaire, I don't know if there's a better story than that. I mean, I'm a big fan, clearly. One day I'm gonna have wine with her. She knows that. But even when women have so many of the important characteristics that they need to have to be entrepreneurs, they still face so many challenges that men often don't have to face. The big one is owning their accomplishments. Why is that? It's because we are taught early on that we shouldn't be boastful. We should just play it safe, play it small. And we do a big disservice to ourselves because, I apologize to all the men in the room, but they don't do that. They don't have to. They weren't told that. So now we're in competitive male fields and they're owning their accomplishments, but we are not. So that's how we disrespect ourselves in many ways. So I will argue that it is not boastful to own your own accomplishments or know your own worth. The reason being, and the difference is that if you are owning your accomplishments in a way that you are proving yourself to other people, well, that seems boastful. That's coming from an entirely different place. But if you're owning your accomplishments from a place of, I know my self-worth, I know who I am, I promise you, you don't even have to say a word. You walk into the room, people know. If you want to say it, you can, that's fine, because there's always the right way to say it, but you honestly don't even have to say it. It becomes that powerful, that message of, I know me, I know what I'm worth, I know who I am. So, I invite all of you to start owning your worth and your accomplishments. Now, the second mistake and challenge that female entrepreneurs tend to have is that they feel like they have to adopt a stereotypical attitude towards business to be successful. Stereotypical meaning aggressive, bossy, we know what I'm talking about. I could go on, but I started my practice running it exactly like that. I mean, I'm in a male-dominated field. I am a female surgeon. I figured that that was the way I was supposed to do things. So I was bossy, I wasn't nice, I didn't care when they had problems. I started off that way. What did I see? You know what? There's a high turnover rate in medical staff offices anyway. Well, I saw exactly that. And boy, is it hard to train people again. Oh, it's a whole challenge. And then I realized that, first of all, I wasn't really authentically being myself because my training hardened me. It changed who I was because I was around, surgeons all the time. So somewhere along the lines, I realized that this wasn't even really me anymore. And I had to find out who I was, which wasn't what I was showing to the world anyhow. So at that moment, I changed how I did things. I actually started to pay attention to my staff. What were their life goals? What did they want out of things? What did they want out of life? What positions did they enjoy? What did they not enjoy? I started to look at all that. When they had problems, I sat them down. What are your problems? How do we work through this? How do we make it that you're still continuing to do what you have to do at your job, but we help you? Well, that shifted everything. All of a sudden, I had employees that, I would figure out where they were better suited and move them into a different position if they didn't like their position. And then I had staff for the longest time. Every now and then somebody had to leave for some personal reason, but I kept my staff for the longest time. What did that do for me? I didn't do it for this reason, but in turn it helped me because keeping staff and not having that turnover made my practice more stable, allowed it to grow, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a win-win really for everybody. And then the last one is earning respect. Earning respect is hard for women. We don't just get given respect when we show up. Whatever title we have, it isn't just really given to us. We still have to show up and earn that respect. When I started in my hospital, I was the only female surgeon. And then I'm young compared to everybody else, so it was a double whammy. So that whole respect thing, I didn't even know how to start to figure out how to earn it. So I just stayed quiet. I went to the surgical meetings, they were all men, and they were much older than me. I didn't really know what to do, and I said, well, whatever, I'll just figure it out. But one day, a patient came into the emergency room with a airway issue. I'm an ENT. Airway is the most important thing, period. So I had to bump another surgeon's case, and there was a GI doctor who had multiple colonoscopies scheduled on a Saturday. The hospital had a rule in place that you had to ask the other surgeon's permission to bump their cases. And all of a sudden, everything shifted for me. So I went up to him and I said, listen, I've got this airway emergency, we gotta go to the OR now. And he looks down at me, because of course he's taller than me, everybody's taller than me, and he looks down and says, listen, you are not bumping my colonoscopies. And I looked up at him and I said, listen, airway comes before butts. I didn't actually say butts, I used another word, but that's okay, you get the gist. But in that moment, he backed down and nobody ever questioned my medical judgment again. I may not have fought for the earning of respect for my own accord, but I was going to fight for it for my patient who was going to die, and luckily everything went fine, and it worked out really well. But it was that moment that I knew that I had to fight for my patient, and in the process, I was able to earn my respect. So that was also a win-win. So we as women have to really embrace our feminine skills and harness this feminine energy in order to not only create a life that looks balanced, but also to create a business that is mindful of that. So, and there is a 6-step process that I've created that we're going to get into in just a bit. But before we get into that 6-step process, I have a mnemonic that will help you remember it, and it's called a strong, beautiful rock star. Okay? Now, I like that mnemonic because it's going to help us remember the 6 steps, but I also use it as a mantra. We women, we tend to doubt ourselves frequently. It's just part of being a woman. So I invite you to say that mantra, not only to remember the mnemonic in the future, but to remind yourself who you are. And I used to do this in front of the mirror regularly. And when you look at yourself in the mirror, I'm not saying look at yourself in the mirror to see if you've got something in your teeth, or your makeup's on right, you've got hair out of place. I'm talking, say this mantra, looking into your own eyes in the mirror. And you will see that that is a very powerful experience, to the point where I could not do it for the longest time without bursting into tears. I've never looked in my own eyes like that. I never really saw myself until I did that. And that's when you start to realize who you are, and then you can move forward with the rest of your feminine entrepreneurship model. So the first is the A in a strong, beautiful rock star, is to assess. We have to know what our end goals are. So in this assessment, we are determining what our end goals are. And it's different for everybody. Some people may just want a stable income to raise a family. Other people may want financial freedom. Other people want different things. But whatever that end goal is, identify it. The next thing, part of the assessment, is to identify your natural rhythms. For too long, we've all been forced into unnatural rhythms. So, whatever this 9 to 5 is, or whatever, it doesn't work for everybody. Everybody has a way that they ideally want to live their life, in a way that they're much more productive. For me personally, I could do wake up early and for a couple of days, but I need a day or two during the week where I start a little slow. And I take my time getting up and I ease into the day. That makes me more productive. Again, it's going to be different for each of you. Some people want to start at noon and work till 6. Some people want to work in short spurts. Whatever that is, if you're an entrepreneur, one of the blessings of being an entrepreneur is that you get to create it the way that you want. You don't have to stuff it into somebody else's paradigm. So keep that in mind and create something that works in your natural rhythm. You'll be more successful and happier that way, for sure. The third part of the assessment, I know assessment's long, but assessment is very important, is to know your superpowers. Now, we all have things we're good at, we all have things we're not so good at. And the bottom line is, as entrepreneurs, we're going to have to do it all, especially in the beginning, until we can hire people to do things later. The important thing to remember is that at least you know what your superpowers are, so you can do what you do best and outsource the rest when you're able to. For example, I like to say I'm not a very domesticated person, so I'm terrible with a lot of domestic things. And I always say, oh, I can fold sheets, I can do this. How hard is it to fold a sheet? Oh, I can fold the flat sheets perfectly well. But let me tell you, it's a whole thing when the fitted sheets come into play. I've watched YouTube videos, I've done this and that, and I have to tell you, I start folding, and I'm like, what is happening here? And the next thing you know, it's in a ball in the closet. And I'm really frustrated, and I'm aggravated, and I can't even get myself together for an hour after that experience. What does that tell me? And I'm using sheets as a silly analogy, but this really applies to anything that frustrates you that much. Folding sheets will take me out of commission for an hour or two. So there's no point in me doing it. I don't even bother trying to fold them. I just put them in a ball. So it's important to know your superpowers, work with them. As soon as you're able to outsource everything else, definitely outsource everything else. The B in a strong, beautiful rock star stands for boundaries. There are a lot of different boundaries, and I'm not really going to go into all of those for the sake of this discussion, but spiritual, physical, emotional boundaries. But there are two that I'd like to talk about that nobody really discusses. The first one is professional boundaries, and the second one is boundaries from ourselves. Okay, professional boundaries. How many of you have been to social engagement, and after the preliminary question of what do you do for a living comes lots of questions about your job. And basically they're trying to just get as much free information as they can out of you while you're at a social gathering. Well, how many of you feel exhausted after doing that? Okay, because you went to something trying to decompress, and then somebody took you right out of that mode into work mode. Well, I don't do that anymore. In the beginning, I used to just really engage in the conversation. I needed new clients, I'm an entrepreneur, et cetera, but it was draining me. Now what I do is I tell them, oh, I'd love to talk to you about this more, but let's set up a time or book an appointment and do it another time. And the great thing about that is it weeds out anybody who's just trying to get free information from you. When you're a doctor, people are always trying to get free information out of you. And it weeds them out, and it preserves my downtime of whatever I'm trying to do. The second one's a little harder, especially for me. Boundaries from ourselves. That can be tough. I can tell you that in my past life as an ENT surgeon, I did not have boundaries for myself at all. You know, the bottom line is that I always kind of over scheduled myself. I used to basically put down everything in my planner and fill every moment until I had no time left in the day, basically getting to the point of physical and emotional exhaustion, which is burnout. We have to create even boundaries from ourselves sometimes, because sometimes we can be our own worst enemy. Now, the S, oh, sorry, I went backwards. So I was like, wait, I was like, how did I miss the S? The S was self-care. I'm like, sorry, I went backwards. The S is self-care, and that is so important because, you know, how many of you actually think self-care is selfish? Oh, thank God. Thank God, it's gotten to the point where people don't think that anymore.
It's necessary.
It's so necessary. I mean, when it comes to self-care, it's about really just honoring your needs and your commitments and doing things that honor your soul. And there are definitely many different types of self-care, but you know, I would say that the most important thing is that you take care of yourself in the ways that you need at the times you need it. So like, for example, there's emotional self-care, spiritual self-care, physical self-care. You can't do everything all the time, and I think that's the one thing people need to remember, because at the end of the day, you'll know which one you need more of, depending on what's going on in your life. And I have to say that in my old life, like I said, as an ENT surgeon, I would have gotten an F in the self-care department, because again, overscheduling, doing something all the time, you know, that led me to a point of complete exhaustion. Now what I do is I plan things so much differently. So I literally went from, you know, burnout to self-care junkie in a matter of years. Now what I do is I obviously plan out my week's way in advance, and I put in the important activities like work, et cetera, et cetera. But then I immediately start to fill in things that are self-care, whether it's my meal planning, my fitness regimen, whatever spiritual things I need to do, emotional downtime I need to have, whatever that may look like, I make sure and put it into my calendar so that it's in there. I also color code everything. Color code it so that I can quickly look and see if it looks balanced at a glance. So that hopefully is very helpful because it's been wonderful for me. Now there are 3 R's in Rockstar. The first one is rewards. How many of you have pets? Okay, pets are all about positive reinforcement. One day I had this revelation. What if I rewarded myself for all the things I don't want to do, especially, because as entrepreneurs we have to do a lot of things we don't want to do. What if I rewarded myself as much as I rewarded my pet? Huh. Well, it's amazing how that changed for me. It changed everything. Because all of a sudden I was getting rewards for things, and they don't have to be big ones. It could be a latte, little things like that. It changed my whole perception to this feeling of drudgery, to this feeling of, oh, look at that, you know, I'm joyful because I got to do this, or oh, I got to do that. It makes me feel so much better about what's going on in my life. The second one is reflection, the second R. Because we get so in the mode of doing that we often don't sit back and reflect on what's happening. And as a business owner, it's very important to reflect on what you're doing and what you've been doing so you know if you want to continue in that. Because what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different result. If you don't look at what you're doing, you don't know what you need to change. So as an entrepreneur, if you're spending 80% of your time doing something that's generating only 20% of your revenue, that really needs to shift. You really want to be in the other way, doing 20% of your time generating 80% of your revenue. So that's why it's so important to reflect, because you may need to tweak, you may need to pivot, you may need to go maybe a whole different direction, who knows. The last R is reassess. So this is where you look at your original assessment, you kind of go through the process, you know, evaluate whether your boundaries are intact, whether you're getting enough self-care, all these things that we're talking about. But now you want to reassess and see if you're in alignment to get to your end goal. Because if you're not, again, some changes may need to be made to the point where you have to tweak some things, or sometimes you have to change course 100%. I've been in positions in entrepreneurship that I've had to tweak and just pivot a little bit. Then there are times that I've literally had to change course. And you'll know, as entrepreneurs, I think we have pretty strong instincts to know which one is which. So at the end of the day, we've talked about a lot today in this short period of time. We've talked about the attributes that entrepreneurs need to have: courage, ambition, resilience. We've talked about the struggles that entrepreneurs face, female entrepreneurs, owning their accomplishments, having a stereotypical attitude towards business, and earning respect. We've also gone over a mnemonic, which will help us remember how to practice feminine entrepreneurship in a different way to increase the longevity and our balance in our lives. And at this point, I would say that once you've really mastered these techniques, you can actually watch other people as they get smacked down by the waves, and you can tell because they look worse for the wear. And meanwhile, you will learn to navigate those angry waters of the ocean when they get angry. Sometimes they're calm, with quiet determination, strength, and grace. And the beauty of it is that you can do this, and at the end of it, you'll still look fresh, with your makeup looking great, lipstick not smudged, mascara still on right, and you won't look worse for the wear. I thank you for spending time with me today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Yes.
Do you miss being surgeon?
I don't know. Sometimes there are parts of it that I do, but I don't miss all the stress. And it got to the point after 20, and I practiced for 20 years, but I was doing surgery for at least 7 before that. So it's close to 30 years. So I think that by the time I left, I was really ready to do something different. But definitely was enjoyable while I did it. But I think there's always a time when it's time for a change. Yes.
So given what you know now,
Yes.
do you reach out to your friends, past surgeons, current surgeons, and try to help them at least in 1 or 2 of those areas?
Interestingly enough, that's a really great question. I actually when I started my speaking, I actually wanted to speak at hospitals. That's what I thought I wanted to do. I found, interestingly, the hospitals and medical professionals are the most resistant to hearing this kind of message. So that was when I actually changed, and talk about changing gears and pivoting a little bit. I had really pigeonholed myself into speaking to only women in medicine. Guess what? Women in medicine don't want to hear any of this. They're stuck where they're stuck. And I feel like, so that's when I started to broaden my horizons to professional women, because now I've got a bigger audience of people, the ones who want to hear it will show up. And sometimes they're professional women, but I can't tell you how many women have reached out to me, women in medicine on LinkedIn. They won't move forward with what's necessary, because I'm also a life coach. They can't find the time.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
hard.
They can't find the time. Well, you make the time. You have to make the time because it's for your own well-being. Yes.
So I'm sorry, I just joined.
Oh, no problem.
Your speech, and it's a pleasure. The few words that I heard, very inspiring. And what I wanted to ask you was, as a working woman and a woman entrepreneur, and that is, if you're at all comfortable talking about it, what was your rock bottom?
So many. There are quite a few. I would say that my first rock bottom, and actually because this talk was short, I usually talk about it in the talk, but this is usually an hour keynote. But I had cancer in my I started my practice 3 months later. I'm an EMT. I felt a nodule in my neck, and I knew it was something bad, and I had a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old at the time. So I was a new mother, starting a new practice, just finished residency. I had my surgery, and one of the complications of thyroid surgery is that you can get hypocalcemia. Well, I argued politely with my surgeon, because my calcium was already borderline before I was, the next day. I wanted to go home. I wanted to be with my kids. I don't know, it was comforting to just be at home. So I told him I'm leaving and I will get my blood work in the morning. Well, that never happened, because I woke up with a dangerously low calcium. I had some symptoms that I already knew about, rushed to the hospital, almost died. Called in my amp of calcium gluconate on the way to the hospital. I sounded like I was having a stroke because my muscles were going into tetany. And I was hunched over, like walking like this into the hospital. But then the nurse put the IV in my arm and got that calcium in me, and it was like, oh, thank God, I'm going to live. And it's interesting because you would have thought that that would have made me change the way I was doing things, but I was too early in my career at that point, so I just kept doing things the traditional way. I just brushed it all under the rug because I was like, I don't got time for this. I gotta do X, Y, and Z. 10 years later, I started waking up with panic attacks. And I did not know why. I saw a therapist because I'm like, I don't know what's going on. And it was really, I had buried that whole trauma of almost dying. And I came back, and that was when I woke up. 10 years later, I woke up and I said, oh, there's a different way to do things. And this has pretty much been my life's mission since then. I've been thinking about this and talking about these things for quite some time, because I think all women need to know these things, because we tend to put ourselves last and just drive forward and not necessarily do the best things for ourselves at times. That's a great question, thank you. I'm an open book, literally. You can ask me anything. Oh, and then there's my contact information, Instagram, LinkedIn, my website, and my book, Beauty Unbound, kind of talks about my journey from a lot of little snippets from what we've talked about today. And anyway, any other questions that anybody has? Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kalpana, for such an insightful talk. So.